Hey everyone, my name is Reagan Short. This is Justin Ibarra, as he mentioned. We were talking about homophonic collisions. Our subtitle is Hold Me Closer, Tony Danza. We were going to play this media file for you, of course with technical difficulties. We're not going to get the audio, but Phoebe Buffay on Friends makes a lyrics mistake and thinks that the lyrics to Tiny Dance were Hold Me Closer, Tony Danza, which of course is Tiny Dancer. And so that was the inspiration for the name of this talk. Okay, so just a quick about us, not that you care. My name is Reagan Short. I'm a technical director at Blue Voyant, which is a security company. I work on the operations innovation team, and I focus on supporting our SOC by working with a bunch of other teams within the organization. My name is pronounced with a hard G, like the hard G in regex.
And my name is Justin Ibarra. I lead the Threat Research and Detection Engineering team at Elastic, where I was previously a principal security research engineer. We focus primarily on building out capabilities, detection and preventions for EDR, SIM, and other features. And I pronounce regex the correct way with the soft G, as in Justin.
Potato, potato. All right, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. We're going to go over our motivation to give the speech, how we came up with this idea. We're going to talk about determining homophones and near homophones. Then we're going to showcase some homophonic collisions in the wild, the fun part. We'll talk about some defensive opportunities, and then if we have time, we'll discuss what's next. All right, so the overview and motivation here. We think with a lot of the technological changes we've seen throughout time here, that's just not going to go away, is it? Okay, well we can just
keep talking.
Yeah. So obviously, Siri and Google Assistant and these methods of interacting with machines through text have been, or with speech, have been around for a while. They've increased over time. And since it's 2023, we're legally obligated to mention ChatGPT in our talk. So certainly there are a lot of things being built as wrappers around ChatGPT. So we think that this integration of human-machine interaction over speech, language, and oral communication represent an emerging risk. And we think this particular topic has a high degree of prevalency, but also a low degree of awareness, which we thought makes this a really good opportunity to talk about. So I'm always interested to know where somebody came up with the idea, and this is something we kind of stumbled into. Back in 2016, Justin and I worked together in a SOC, and I registered a parody domain as part of a local domain that I had for the SOC for a different analyst to work on crack me challenges. As I set up that domain to host a particular image for a particular piece of that site, I generated a catch-all email address. So anytime somebody sent an email to anything at that domain, it hit my personal Gmail. And wouldn't you know it, almost instantaneously, I started to get some really interesting emails that were certainly not intended to come my way. And those are some of the things we're going to show you. Over time, as we saw these interesting things come through, this turned into a mutual interest research project. So here's a little snippet. You'll see more of this later, but one of the big wow factors for me was when I got some PII accidentally, again, completely passively. So here's the configuration here. You can see I registered a domain, crownstrike.com, and I built a wildcard redirect to this site that I built, local404.org, and it was specifically for this post, which was about finally a SOC lifestyle tool. You'll also see here I set up my catch-all to my personal Gmail account. So the image I hosted, a bit of a parody image here, is poking fun at some of the issues we had. The idea here, of course, was that this represented a merger between a security tool and, of course, an alcoholic beverage to reach some market synergy for SOC analysts who are driven to drink by their security tooling. So Justin's going to talk about some ways to determine and look at homophones.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously we have to understand these in order to process them. So let's start by defining what homophonic collision truly means. And so it's essentially a homophone, which is two or more words which have similar pronunciation with different meanings. And of course, this causes confusion in written and spoken language. And in spoken language, we tend to get clarification through context, whereas written, it tends to be in spelling. And so our specific use of homophonic collisions has the intentional exploitation undertone. This graphic's really awesome for showing like the abstracted layers of linguistic communication. And as you can see, we're going to be focusing on the lowest layers here, phonetics and phonology. And where we kind of based this off of like the pyramid of pain where we were influenced. And so we call this the coils of communication chaos, right? And so you can see as you dig through these abstractions of human communication, as we go to the top, it's some of the things we're more familiar with, right? Phishing, which takes advantage of the context and understanding in the words and the sentences. Homoglyph attacks, domain squatting, right, which takes advantage of the visual perception of the words or the words in isolation. And what we're talking about, right, homophonic collision, sound squatting, which takes advantage of what you hear, the sounds around the words. Bank of a Miracle instead of Bank of America. So, what is the composition of an audible word, right? Essentially, like we said in the last slide, it's composed of phonetic pronunciation, which are represented by phonemes, and that's what you can see here, a series of phonemic arrays. And so the word besides, right, you can see it's represented twice because there's besides and B-sides, right? And B-sides has the collision with B-sides, the security conference. And then, of course, troopers sounds a lot like true purse, right? And you can see that the phonemic array looks very similar. So again, digging into a homophone, essentially like the phonemic arrays are going to be identical, right? Deer and deer, like the animal and your grandma, new and new. And new and new is actually very interesting because both have dual pronunciations, new and new, and they're both collisions because they both share that. That's rare. Now, a near homophone, right, these aren't identical, but they're similar. Page and rage, driver, diver, and really, this is where a lot of the fun is, and this is where the most susceptibility is, because these are less obvious to people, right, and there's so many permutations of these. Okay, you want to try to close it?
Yep.
So, looking into near homophones more, we took multiple approaches, built a couple different algorithms for trying to determine these. We heavily leveraged NLTK and the Carnegie Mellon Pronunciation Dictionary, CMUDIC. And this phonemic notation that we're using is the ARPABET. There's multiple ones. This one seems the most expressive for us. Okay, so one of the things we actually did, we looked into syllabic partitioning, right? Like breaking the word across syllables. And the way we were going to approach this, right, you can see the word organization, and all of the highlighted phonemes are the vowels, right? Along with their stress pattern to it. And so we could take advantage of that to try to build or partition these programmatically. But there's problems, right? Especially with a language like English, which has a lot of exceptions. So you can see some of these examples below. Retraction works well for that. Ritual also works well. But enjoyment, inflection, organization, you can see enjoyment. That's not how we pronounce it. So it's an exception, one of the difficulties we had to overcome. So talking about splitting now, it was important that we split the word because when you think about a word, erosion, for instance, right, there's not going to be a lot of homophonic collisions with that. It's fairly rare. But when you think about ogen or on, ion, those definitely may have overlapping collisions. And so we split it in two ways. Subwords, which you see, on, and ion, right? Those are all subwords that are composed from the big word. And then syllabic partitioning, which I just talked about. And so you can see in that bottom row, we can reassemble the word erosion with all of those different pronunciations, well, similar pronunciations, all those different spellings of row, and those are all potential opportunities for us to take advantage of. So the thing is, though, like because there's so many near homophones, they're not all created equal, right? And so we have to kind of score them, or at least give them some kind of relative value, so we can say this is much closer of a near homophone than this, right? This one's going to have a higher success. And so very quickly, just stepping through some of the algorithms we built out for this, absolute phoneme correlation, where we walk the phonemic array forwards and backwards, and any overlap in those phonemes will up the score. Contiguous relative phoneme correlation, kind of the same thing, but space independent, so anywhere within. So again, longer words, there's a higher chance of overlap. And we used Levenstein distance in two different ways. One specifically to the phoneme, essentially, fill in the phoneme where you would have a letter. And then secondarily, taking advantage of the characteristics of phone sounds, like what you do with your mouth to create the noise, and then taking like the Levenstein distance of that. There's also, obviously a lot of potential behind a model approach. And interestingly, potential future research, taking a more acoustic approach where you're audio sampling, because things like dialects and stuff like that, like we still don't pronounce the same way identically. Everyone's a little different. And so it goes from that absolute phoneme pronunciation to a more literal one. So like I mentioned, these are some other challenging opportunities Tech lexicon, right? Like we like to have fun with words, but they're not real words. So there's confusion in how to pronounce those, which is opportunity in this case, but also a problem for us when trying to programmatically parse these. Things like colorama, schematics, those aren't real words, right? B-sides, like the conference, that's obviously spelled different. And then I-O, some people say E-O, some say I-O, some say something else. I mentioned dialects. An interesting one, especially like being from the US here in Germany, think about a Texan, someone who's been in Texas their whole lives, coming here after 30 years learning German, they're going to have some weird pronunciations and translations, and so that's a huge opportunity there. And it's a big focus of computational linguistics, which is much more mature in that. And then, of course, like I said earlier, the specific exceptions relative to languages like English, it's definitely a big challenge. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about some homophonic collisions in the wild. So how we found vulnerable domains, we essentially filtered the Alexa Top 1000, reduced it to US-based .coms, auto-generated homophonic collisions based on those, and then, similar to DNS Twist, the tool, if you're familiar with that, and then we scanned all these, checked if it was registered, connected, or suspicious, and you can kind of see what the tool looks like on the side, and we dump out a big JSON of all the details. Right, and so here's some examples. Right, Walmart, here's a screenshot. Clearly, this is an exploitation attempt. Those links do not go to Walmart, even though they say they do. No detections. Interesting. Here's Bank of America, however you want to pronounce it. Again, obviously exploiting. This one did have a couple detections. Very interesting, right? And just jumping through a couple other quick ones that were interesting. WebEx with 2 Bs did have a couple detections. Wells Fargo, as you can see, with the additional E. And then, of course, YouTube, which is pronounced the same way, all malicious. So we did the same thing with PyPy packages. We wanted to see how this was being abused there as well, right? We know there's typo squatting attacks all day long on all of these packages. But what about homophonic collisions? And so we took a similar approach. We scanned the most popular libraries, and we ran our algorithms against it, and we came up with this list. And it was awesome. We were able to validate against Datadog's GuardDog data set, where they actually went through and validated a bunch of malicious libraries. So these were all validated as malicious, which was awesome. And so you can see, right, especially like Colorama, okay, that makes sense, but like requests, right, that's arguably like one of the most popular libraries in Python. And look at all those attempts, dquest, fquest, gquest, requests, all obviously trying to take advantage of that. Unfortunately, I don't know if you've seen recently, PyPy's recently upped their response because of a mass, essentially, it's been increasing lately, attacks on it. So most of these are already taken down, so didn't get you any awesome evidence of that. So very quickly, just some other risks and vectors. Like Reagan had mentioned earlier, speech to text and text to speech translation is kind of making a little bit of a resurgence with LLMs and ChatGPT, and that's got huge potential for incidental abuse and misunderstanding. And then, of course, Siri, Google, other voice assistants have always been there. And then, all kinds of other namespaces, social media handles, usernames, email addresses. Essentially, like, we hear all those things, and any of those are opportunities. Okay.
All right, so we're going to get to the fun part and show you a couple of screenshots of various things that we saw. And I'm sure you're thinking, okay, this all sounds well and good, but surely nothing important ever gets transmitted accidentally to the wrong email address or to the wrong destination because somebody mishears something. And you'll see that contextually, a lot of these are the result of a third party. And so this is really demonstrative of the errors or the fallibility of oral transmission. I can imagine that in many of these cases, some somebody was talking to somebody else over the phone, provided an email address, and that set the stage for this transmission of information. So we'll start with a few tame ones. Here we've got an executive checking in to the W Hotel in San Francisco, and this is actually a check-in, not a post-checkout portfolio. I thought this was interesting because this was actually during RSA, so a little bit of a security conference tie-in there. Here we've got another executive flying to the Cayman Islands, and of course I like to think conspiratorially, so who knows what was going on there. I mean, probably just like a family vacation or something, but you know, you never know. Here, we see an executive being with a limo order. If you actually search that destination address, that is the UPS Global Technology Headquarters. So very easy to assume that there's a big business deal going on here. And of course, you've got the date and the time there. You may say I blocked out there the phone number. This is a guy worth, what, 8 figures? Yeah, I mean, he's a pretty rich guy, good phone number to have. He didn't answer when I called him, no big deal. Here's an email we captured from senior director at the French embassy to the CEO and CTO of one of the organizations that we had a domain for, specifying that he really wanted to help them set up business in France, but also providing his travel itinerary, which could be interesting for anybody trying to perhaps target somebody from the French embassy. This is a credit card authorization form, which includes the American Express credentials for one of the organizations that we had a domain for. What's really interesting here is that what I initially received was an email from a vendor submitting their vendor application form. And being a good guy, whenever I saw something that looked like it could potentially interrupt business, I would go ahead and forward it on to what the intended destination was, right? And so what ended up happening was the recipient hit reply all and included me on the chain and then sent their Amex credentials to pay for this, to pay for this vendor to work an event. So really interesting that being a good guy made me a bad guy. Here from the state of Indiana sent an IWO, which is basically an income withholding for child support, to this organization for a particular employee. You can see, again, I've got this employee social security number. Obviously not ideal. This is maybe one of my favorite examples. Got an email from FedEx about a package that was held up in customs for the UK, and basically giving me an opportunity to reroute the package or specify an alternative destination. You can see there, I blew up the description. This box was full of facility access badges. And you're probably thinking, now Reagan, those are just blank, just regular badges that haven't been modified yet. Well, you might notice that the source address is actually the commercial address for this organization. So these were likely already programmed. So again, if I was interested in physical access, this might have been another opportunity for me to parlay this particular communication. This one I thought was interesting. So here, general manager of a hotel reached out to an organization specifying they had an issue with one of their computers, and they really needed to kind of get their security telemetry set up and get an agent installed in their computer. And of course, again, you can see, here's my proof that this particular one, I forwarded on to the organization, their support team. I went ahead and told them, this happens all the time, but no response, so no big deal. This one I thought was also interesting. This was scanned by an employee, presumably handwritten in. So this was a DHS form for employment eligibility. Again, PII, social security number, telephone number, all that fun stuff. I thought that one was kind of fun. And the last one I had that I thought was really interesting, somebody from AT&T attempted to schedule onboarding for Access My LAN, which is presumably a mechanism to VPN into some aspect of this environment. So I guess I could have taken that meeting and set that up on my own machine, but who knows what AT&T would have done to validate my identity. So a little bit more relevant here to a security conference, Justin mentioned the connection between besides and B-sides. So one of the domains we registered was B-sides, BE-sides-LV.org. And what was it, just a day or two after we did it, one of the runners of that particular chapter of B-sides checked into the Tuscany Suites, which is, of course, where that's typically held. So we thought that was really interesting. When we presented this at B-Side San Antonio, they had a good kick out of that. Similarly, we got this email from Bill.com for an AppSec company wanting to sponsor the organization for some total of $12,000. Of course, we didn't do anything malicious here because, again, we're good guys. Justin, you want to talk about our defensive opportunities?
For sure. So here's a couple methodologies, opportunities, detections that we thought of for this, right? Essentially exposing an API to look this up, right? Am I vulnerable? Essentially passing different words, brand names, stuff like that, and getting back that scoring, getting back an understanding of potential risks, and then using that, right? Incorporating that either proactively or reactively. Potentially building detection logic around streaming data for these explicitly defined words, and then potentially subscribing to registrations of new domains, new packages, new certificates, which says something's being set up, right? Some kind of infrastructure. And if that collides with some unexpected collisions of your own, obviously that's a risk. And then, of course, exposing resources to PyPy and other like package ecosystems, which we're starting to see more of that. So I think that's a big one and the way to go. So I thought it'd be worthwhile to at least step through one rule or detection logic around how this could potentially be done, right? So you could take, again, the DNS twist approach, generate these homophonic collision opportunities, get all the combinations, and then you could, on top of your streaming data, say, if this occurs, send me an alert. So obviously, if it was troopers and any of these happened from within your network, it's probably bad. Was it intentional or not? We don't know yet, but at least we can detect on it. Right, and this is on attempts, right? And so we can iterate on this, go one step further and say, well, if there was a successful connection, then let's definitely alert, right? And so this is looking beyond at the status code and checking if it was success. And then finally, we can go one step even further, right? If those other ones are too noisy for you, right? If you have a lot of bad users within your environment, this one takes it one step further and says, if that DNS request happens and it's successful, and then a file is created, so a file is downloaded, then definitely alert me, right? And we can take this all kinds of ways, but I thought it'd be useful to step through at least one example. So what's next, right? So in the process of this, like we kind of referenced multiple times, we built a lot of code around enabling this. So essentially, we're going to release this package called Phonemical, which we call a phenomenal toolkit for having fun with phonemes and homophonic collisions. And so essentially it's just a toolkit full of utilities, word splitting, determining homophonic collisions, determining near homophones, all of that fun stuff. And it is wrapped around NLTK, CMU-DICT. And at the same time, we plan to, we've got most of this stuff staged, we're just cleaning up some loose ends, but we're gonna stand up phonemical.io to at least host this stuff, expose that API we talked about, share some of these further statistics beyond these high-level examples that we had, just allow people to peruse through it and do what they will. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much. Any questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, so then we conclude your talk. Well, thank you very much again.
All right. Thank you.